Good morning and welcome to another Retail Responds webinar. I'm Bob Clements, I'm the president of Axsium Group, and I appreciate you joining me for another in our weekly series to talk about how COVID-19 is affecting both retail and hospitality, but also the workforce and workforce management related in these industries as well. The goal of these, as always, is to help provide you with a different perspective. We're in the weeds every day with our own businesses, and it's often hard to get a different perspective to find out what other people are doing, whether those are those essential businesses that are open or the non-essential businesses that have a majority of their stores closed or somewhere in between. So we hope that that provides some insight and some perspective and helps you navigate the next several weeks, the next several months as successfully as possible. Now, if you are interested in getting a little bit more information, I encourage you to go visit our Retail Responds page. You can find that at retailresponds.com, and you can go there for past recordings of our webinars, for blog posts, as well as key updates. In fact, based on some feedback that we got last week, we're working on creating a central resource for governmental information so you can get latest around executive orders and things like that. So keep an eye on Retail Responds for more information about more information as it relates to COVID-19 and your business. Today, our focus is really going to be around how you can respond to COVID-19, how you can engage your workforce, how you can keep them informed, and all of the things that are changing in your stores or plan to be changed in your stores by taking advantage of this little device that everybody has in their hand right now. And yes, so our topic today is going to be talking about employee mobility and how it can be leveraged through the coronavirus pandemic. Now, joining me today is Andrew Martell. Andrew is our practice lead for our employee mobility practice. Andrew, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Bob. I'm happy to be here.
I guess before we get too deep into our discussion, I think it probably makes sense for us to level set and to talk. And when we say employee mobility, what do we mean? What do you mean when we talk about employee mobility?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. It's probably best to level set on what we mean for mobility and employee mobility. And frankly, it's really just the aspect of team members and managers using, exactly as you put it, your mobile phones or your tablets, or really any untethered medium or device in the workplace and even outside of the workplace, and saying that it can be used for work-related or productivity-related tasks and can be used for non-related tasks as such. In other words, when we look at it, it's really, mobility is more than just the normal WFM workforce tasks. It's more than just scheduling and timekeeping, which it does include, but it also has stuff that engages employees, so communication and training components.
So it's more than, it's simply more than bring your own device. It could be the device that you're providing people in the store, and it could be something that allows them to manage their work. It could also be something that allows them to manage their work life, in which case it could be something around their personal devices as well, right?
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of that as well, is the kind of the differentiation between your own personal device as well as the kind of the company provided ones, or even the in-store provided ones.
Yeah, makes sense. So how are people leveraging mobility during the pandemic?
Yeah, it's been interesting. I've had a lot of discussions with business leaders over the last couple of, frankly, weeks and months as this has kind of played out. And a lot of them are really focused on obviously trying to stay afloat and trying to understand, okay, well, what's our new normal, and when are we reopening, and what does that look like? But as we're kind of talking through this, a lot of the issues that are coming up are starting to have a similar trend. And one of the biggest ones that we're seeing is obviously communication. And that's communication across the board that we're seeing as kind of a concern, but as an opportunity, frankly, when we look at mobility, about getting that messaging directly to whoever it needs to be, if it's an employee, if it's a coworker, if it's a manager. And then when we're looking at stuff like that, at issues that some of the companies are having, we're starting to see a lot of trends based off of the type of industry or grouping of the company, frankly. So when we talk to essential businesses who are still open, what we're seeing for them is they just really need to share real-time communication to their employees and their managers who are still working. So this can be new processes, new procedures, health and safety advice that they need to get there, and mobility kind of gives that direct link. But we're also seeing areas for essential businesses where it comes into play around a lot of new hires or bulk hirings. I was recently at Costco actually last week and noticed that they had a lot of new hires that frankly their sole job was cleaning this plexiglass that they had between the cashier and the customer, and this was being done every 5 minutes. So when it comes to these new hires and these new roles, what mobility has kind of taken communication and has then built it out into an onboarding functionality. So it's allowing these new employees to kind of get ready within days rather than weeks. For non-essential businesses, so those who are maybe not open at this point, it's really starting to communicate. And I know, Bob, you and I have spoken to some retailers who are using mobility as a form of communication for their furloughed employees. So we're having that kind of back and forth to understand, look, this is where we're at in the process, and here's where we're going. Here's what it'll look like when we reopen. So kind of getting that conversation started.
Well, and I think that communication in and of itself is so interesting, because I think that organizations that have a means to communicate directly to their employees are ensuring that their employees are getting the right message. Otherwise, it's a little bit of a game of telephone that goes from corporate through a district manager to the store manager, and then the store manager to the employee. And is that communication coming out really the way that you want it to come out at this point?
Not to mention, with mobility, you have a pretty good idea that it's going directly to them. We've spoken to managers who've said, yeah, we usually send notifications and information through email. And then we speak to the employee and they say, yeah, I have a corporate email or company email, but I don't remember the password, so I just never check it. So with the mobility, it kind of breaks down that wall and allows them to have that easier access, and making sure, to your point, it's not going through all these different gates, so to speak. It's kind of going through.
Yeah, and I think one of the other sides of it too is that too often what we see is, if you don't have a formal way to communicate, and so many of the hourly associates don't have email, they just don't have access to something along those lines. But so what that is left to is the store manager either using text or some private Facebook group, or hopefully it's private Facebook group, or WhatsApp or something along those lines. But then all that communication happens outside of your view, and you're not sure what, again, has actually been said, and if everybody got the message. So it's interesting. Mobility gives us an interesting opportunity, I think, to create that communication. But to me, that's only one piece of it. We'll talk about that in a minute. It is interesting, though, because we found as we got into the pandemic, so many retailers didn't have a good way to communicate with people outside of work. They might have had a corporate intranet that was available, but the minute I can't go to work anymore, I don't have access to that site anymore. And so they've had to put things in very quickly. And this, like a lot of things, people have not been able to think strategically about. You just don't have time to think strategically when you're putting out fires or trying to keep things afloat. We haven't been able to think strategically. And I think the good news when we think about mobility and getting something out from a mobile perspective is our experience is it doesn't need a lot of runway. We can implement a mobile solution, get communications out or other pieces out incredibly quickly, typically in weeks, and sometimes even faster, and then you can kind of build upon that. So I guess that leads me into my next question for you, Andrew, which is how would somebody approach mobility if they were starting right now, kind of in this chaotic time? Kind of what's the first thing that they would look at, and maybe what would they look at early on versus what would they defer later on? What would maybe be the 5 things you'd think about?
Yeah, so if we were to exactly, I think that's a great point, is like, when we look at mobility, we look at it as a very big offering or a very big solution, when frankly we can kind of limit ourselves, or at least bring it down to where do we start off, or where is kind of the first target. And I think across the board for essential, non-essential, and maybe even companies that fall somewhere in the middle there, is really, as we've spoken about, is communication. And when we look at communication with mobility, there are kind of these subcategories. So the first one is really corporate to employees. It's top-down communication. How do I make sure that I'm getting the most up-to-date information to them? How do I make sure that health and safety policies are being sent out to who it needs to receive? The second one is really peer-to-peer. And exactly your point is, if I'm communicating with a coworker or with a manager and my company is not providing me with a means or a medium to do that, then I guess I got to use Facebook or text. And sadly, we're in a day and age right now where data security is a big concern. So sometimes, depending on what you're using and what's being said, if it's around, company information or whatnot, there's always kind of that concern. So providing a safe means of doing that, and frankly, a balanced one across the board on a peer-to-peer level, kind of provides that opening where you can have that communication.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And before we keep going on there, the idea of that top-down piece of it, the idea of the corporate piece, I think it's important that it goes down as well as comes back up. I know a number of retailers that have taken an approach of, hey, we're going to slap a website up and we're going to post things up there, and maybe that's going to be public. And the problem is then associates don't have a good way of communicating back or asking questions. And it's hard to also make that communication relevant for individual areas. So if I'm in South Carolina and next week I've got some stores that are opening, how do I know that I can go get to work? That one site's not going to help me necessarily.
Well, and exactly your point is that there's the kind of the discussion back way, the two-way communication. And I think what we're also seeing, especially to your point, is okay, so we're reopening stores now. How are we messaging? How are we getting the message out to our customers, to our clients? How are we spreading that out? So using mobility in a sense can also allow you to create and I guess in a way level set what that public facing message is. So if you need to share deals or information about store reopenings, or hey, we're having a new offering because of what's going on, there is that approach where you can have that communication and then send back feedback and really, frankly, open up and make it accessible.
You're right. You're right. We've seen a number of solutions that retailers have implemented that not only allow for communication internally, but that allow for social sharing of certain information. So in the past, we've seen customers use this like in a grocery store setting where associates and store managers can send out promotions. And those promotions go to Twitter or Facebook or Instagram or whatever. We've seen movie chains that use this type of communication vehicle to then allow them to promote trailers to their customers through the associates. Yeah. Now this gives you the ability to promote, hey, we're opening this store, or hey, we have this online deal, and do other things where your associates can be productive even when your stores are less productive than you'd like. I think that's a great point. But we've talked a lot about communication. What else can we do besides communication? What else is important early on?
Yeah, I would say the next one that we've been seeing in that frankly has kind of surprised me a little bit is around mobile punching. So it's the aspect of punching in or out of my shift using my phone. And really what this has come to be and why it's really grown in popularity is around the health and safety aspect of it. So instead of having employees all using the same time clock and either using their fingerprint or typing in their ID, same thing with a backroom computer, you're now having individuals being able to clock in using their phone, their own device. So right there, health and safety wise, you're kind of clearing that whole process. The other one that we're starting to see is providing people with an opportunity to actually work or I guess clock in, so to speak, off-site. So without being limited, in this sense, you could say, well, maybe I have an opportunity to do some onboarding or some training, but I need to still clock in for this training shift. How do I do that if I'm not physically at the store? So mobile punch-in, in a sense, can both create boundaries of where you can punch in, but also widen them.
Well, it's astounding that we're having this conversation, because mobile punching, the idea that I can clock in and out on my phone, is something that's been around for a long time. But retailers have really not only not embraced it, they've actively kind of pushed it away, because there's this fear of, number one, I don't want people to clock in and out on their phone because I'm not confident in geofencing, or geofencing is hard to set up. Does that create an unfair advantage? Does this do this? Does it do that? But we're in a situation right now where you may want to limit the amount of people that you have in your store. You may be hiring people up, but they don't have a place where they can actually go for training. If you implement mobile punching now people can actually work while they're from home. And I mean, that's like almost mind-blowing, but it also solves another problem, which is you also don't want people working off the clock, and you don't necessarily want to trust people to record their time accurately having a mobile clock is the best way to solve that problem. It's really cool that we're there right now. It's sad in some ways, but it's, as a
Yeah.
workforce management geek, I think it's cool. So beyond punching, what else is there that's out there?
Well, you said you're a workforce management geek, so I guess the next point really works well for you then, but it focuses around scheduling. And what we're seeing, frankly, is that what we're used to for scheduling is kind of just taken that and evolved the next stage. So I don't want to date or age myself, but I used to work in fast food. And back then, when we had a schedule, we had to go physically into the store, or I had to call up my manager and say, can you tell me what my shifts are for next week or for the next 2 weeks? But now with mobility, you can say, I know my shifts come out on a Friday. I can open up my phone and I can see what I'm working, what role I'm doing, and then have that accessibility. Within the accessibility component, we're also having the functionality around self-scheduling. So being able to update your availability, making sure what your shifts are and how you can control them. One of the things that we're hearing and kind of the conversation is really that employee schedules right now are very liquid. They're not what they used to be, in the sense that if I was a 5-day-a-week day shift, maybe at that point it's no longer. Maybe it's 3 days and it's a rotating basis. So having that ability to set what you can do and then see it is huge. Not only that, we're then seeing kind of the third component, which is around schedule management. And that kind of follows into the ability to say, I'm now about to reopen my store. I'm a manager, a district manager. I want to see who can work. So I'm going to actually set up open shifts, and people who are willing to start off or take these shifts. Like you said, some stores might be opening next week. Well, who could pick them up? So being able to create these open shifts will give that power to the employees who are within that location and also are skilled or trained to do that job, to just pick it up. And again, we're seeing this also with essential retailers who are saying, great, I have a whole new role. I don't know who can take this on or who's free. Let me just create these open shifts. And to your point, that helps with capacity and ensuring that I have proper coverage.
All right. So as you called out, I am a workforce management geek and I love some of this conversation, but at the beginning, you also said to me that mobility is about more than workforce management. It's about more than kind of what typically goes on with your workforce management system. So all I've heard is well, except for communication, all I've heard is workforce management. What else goes into this? What else is there?
Yeah, I think the biggest one that we're seeing being frankly flipped on or started as soon as possible is training. And this kind of ties everything back together, because to your point is originally training has never been a part of a WFM system. It's kind of lived outside of it. And in this way, what's happening is we're starting to see the fact that businesses can no longer have at-work training sessions, one-to-one in close proximity, let alone group training sessions or onboarding. So what they're doing now is they're taking these modules, and instead of doing either web learning or in-person training, is turning them into kind of easy to access and frankly flexible. People are able to do them when there's a slow period or a downtime, like we mentioned for the punching in, when they're maybe not even on an at-work schedule but have the time to take on additional training. So this is helping. I think overall what we're seeing is, frankly, this is helping, especially with new hires, getting them onboarded and a part of the organization and the team within days, like 24 hours, where before it used to be, here's a week's worth of documents and papers and training that you have to go through. And now it's being condensed down to a fact that you can get through this on your own time and in a reasonable amount of time.
I think that's a good call out. And I also think that the idea of delivering mobile training, the power of mobile training is almost in terms of the ability to roll out something new very quickly, right? I think that one of the things that we've seen through the coronavirus pandemic is the rapid change that's happened in the retailers that are open and the change that's anticipated for the retailers that are closed. And that's new procedures and new processes. With mobile, now I can do a quick recording of here's how we expect, use Costco plexiglass cleaning just a little bit ago as an example. But now you could do a quick recording of here's what we expect. It needs to cover you need to clean the entire surface area, and it should be this way. This is what right? All of a sudden you can do training like that very quickly and get it out to all of your associates like that. It really, really a powerful idea. Are there anything else that retailers should be thinking about from a kind of a functional perspective? If we first get out if we first get out communication, and then we think about mobile punching and scheduling so we can get people working and know when they're supposed to work, we can get the training piece of it done. What's the next step in the roadmap?
I think the biggest one, and for some people it might be new in a sense, is around task management. So it's taking your processes and whatever flow charts that you may have and actually turning them in these kind of easy to access, easy to do task lists that we're seeing. The other biggest issue, and why this is actually now starting to be used quite a bit, is just around the fact that companies are looking to ensure that all their employees, all their locations are following proper cadence, proper validation. You know, how do we know that this new policy we're putting out is being followed, especially when it's around health and safety? So it could be something like setting up a new hand washing station. Well, with task management, it also allows you to take a photo or a video of it in use and send that back, and that can go up to back to corporate. Exactly to your point, the two-way communication. You guys are asking us to do this. Well, here's how it's looking. You know, any feedback. So that's kind of one of those things that we're seeing as kind of both a future state, but also for some people, this is kind of the next big step, especially for essential business.
Well, it's almost ironic, right? The original business case for task management, way back in the day, was compliance. That if we need to do a price change or if we need to do a product recall, we could send that out to our stores through task management. People could check the box and say we got it done, and then we knew that 80% or 90% of the stores that were compliant, and we could chase after those that weren't. Today, in our coronavirus world, where health and safety and so many of the things that we're doing are around health and safety become paramount, that same benefit case almost becomes core to why task management is so important right now. It's just fascinating to me. I know we're starting to run out of time here a little bit. We've got about 8 minutes left. If you do have any questions, and I'm talking not to Andrew, but to the audience, please feel free to insert those into the chat box. We'll be happy to answer those questions as we get to the end here. I know you're not the chattiest bunch in the world, so but we'd love to hear from you. In the meantime, I guess, Andrew, where does somebody go from here? Kind of what's the next step if I need to communicate, or if I'm thinking about mobility right now for my associates?
Yeah, I think the best way to sum it up is, what is that first win, that easy at bat that you can say or find an opportunity? And frankly, we've spoken about it, but I think it's just around communication and mobile communication, getting that up. The nice thing about it, and one of the most valuable, let's say, resources at this point, is time, right? We've talked about this. There's such already a struggle around we don't have time for this. We're struggling with time. What we're seeing is people are able to get a mobile communication platform up in less than a week. In 4 or 5 days, they can get it started. They can get all their employees on it. They can start sending out messages. And what that does is, A, it gets your adoption of whatever you're setting up already started. But B, it allows you to start building out those next steps. Exactly as we mentioned, what are the next modules, the next functionality? One of the things that I find very interesting in the conversations that I have, and may be controversial to some at this point, but at this time with what's going on, people who are working right now are actually, I would say, the most receptive to change than they've ever been, because change is constantly paramount, and frankly, it's in a point where we are accepting of it because we know it's inevitable with what's going on. So with the amount of change that's going on, having something like a mobile solution or a mobile strategy, if you already have something, is a lot easier to both implement and to succeed than it's ever been before. So I would say take a look at those opportunities. And the one thing I also do want to mention is there are opportunities out there around mobile communication. I know there are some software vendors. I know WorkJam and Quinix have within the last few weeks put out kind of publicly some offerings that are there that people can sign up for or look into. So there are possibilities that can be done within a short period of time.
So, and I appreciate you mentioning a couple of software vendors here, because one of the things I think that is important for us to clarify is when we talk about mobile communication and a tool that's so appropriate for your associates, we aren't talking about a chat app, or we aren't talking about a WhatsApp. We're talking about, because those are relatively closed applications, closed in terms of capability, but also they're closed or they're very kind of in many respects, they're not something that you have control over as the retailer, as the employer. Instead, there are tools out there like WorkJam and Quinix you mentioned. We could also probably throw in Shift and Crew and a couple of others that provide not just the communication element, but then allow you to go down the path of other things, whether that's schedule management or training or task management or other things we haven't even gotten into yet. There are built for purposes applications. And to your point, Andrew, they're responding to help retailers during COVID-19 by making it very easy to get up on the platform, to be able to communicate with your associates, and to be able to ultimately kind of help you navigate through this, which is in some respects what we're trying to do with Retail Response. So Andrew, I really, really appreciate the time that you've given us today and the insight that you've given us. I hope that the audience has enjoyed the time that we've had together. We will be back again next week, and let me bring up the quick slide on that so you can see the date and the time. But we will be back again next week at the same time. So next Thursday at 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time, 8:30 a.m. Pacific, and 4:30 p.m. British Standard or British Summer Time. And what I'm excited about is next week's topic, because we're actually going to turn the tables a little bit. Robin Merritt's going to join me, and she is actually going to host, and I am going to be the subject matter expert. But what we're going to be talking about is social distancing and how to implement social distancing. You know what? How you do it in your stores is one thing, but how do you plan for it, and how do you prepare for social distancing? How is that going to impact your forecast and your schedule? That's what we're going to talk about next week, and I am so excited about it. One of our executives told me that I looked like a kid in an empty candy store, meaning that there was no other customers in the candy store when we started talking about it the other day. So I look forward to talking to you about that next Thursday. Have a great week. I hope you stay safe. Thank you for your time, and I will talk to you again next week.